Across America's farmlands and bustling cities, a silent crisis is unfolding, threatening both livelihoods and the nation's economic foundation. Labor shortages, deepened by strict immigration policies and long-standing neglect, are shaking industries from agriculture to construction and beyond. As costs rise and sectors struggle, the question looms: can America heal the cracks it has created? In today's video, we dive into this controversial issue. Please note, this analysis is for educational purposes only and does not represent any political or organizational view. Let's explore it with an open and objective mindset. The agricultural labor crisis in the United States. Currently, the U.S. agricultural sector is facing a severe labor crisis, a long-standing issue that has worsened in recent years. This labor shortage particularly affects farms, where the demand for workers is especially high, particularly during planting and harvesting seasons. Agriculture, one of the most crucial sectors of the American economy, heavily depends on immigrant labor to maintain efficient operations. However, increasingly strict immigration policies under President Donald Trump's administration led to millions of immigrant workers being deported or prevented from entering the U.S., resulting in a critical shortage of manpower. As the new planting and harvesting seasons begin, American farms are struggling with a lack of workers needed for essential tasks such as harvesting crops, tending to plants, and transportation. These jobs require a large number of experienced workers capable of working long-term. U.S. authorities estimate that up to 5 million immigrant workers who previously worked on farms could legally return to work if given permission. However, the severe labor shortage has become an urgent issue, threatening not only agriculture but also the food supply and the stability of local economies. In response to this crisis, President Donald Trump issued a call to restore the immigrant workforce, urging deported immigrant workers to return to the U.S. to work on farms to address the severe labor shortage in agriculture. This situation impacts not only food production, but also the broader American economy, as agriculture is a vital source of employment and a key driver of rural development. And seriously, if this keeps up, will we have to harvest apples ourselves during a weekend BBQ party? What would you do if your grocery store suddenly turned into a pick-your-own farm? Tell us below. President Trump's proposal and the workers' response. In an effort to address the worsening labor shortage, President Donald Trump introduced a series of incentive measures aimed at restoring the agricultural workforce. His administration proposed offering financial support to immigrant workers willing to return to work, coupled with commitments to improve working conditions. Among the proposed benefits were paid holidays, paid leave, and access to health insurance, basic labor protections that had historically been out of reach for many immigrant workers in the agricultural sector. These proposals appeared to be a strategic attempt to rebuild trust among immigrant communities that had been severely affected by the administration's earlier, harsher immigration policies. At first glance, the initiative seemed like a step toward reconciling economic necessity with humanitarian concerns. However, the reaction from worker representatives and advocacy groups was overwhelmingly critical. They viewed the proposal as a superficial and temporary fix, rather than a genuine attempt at systemic reform. According to these representatives, merely providing financial incentives and marginal improvements in working conditions fails to address the root causes of the labor crisis, namely the long-standing exploitation and systemic mistreatment of immigrant laborers. Worker advocates emphasize that immigrant farm workers have historically been subjected to some of the harshest working environments in the United States, often laboring under grueling conditions for low wages, without adequate legal protections or access to basic benefits. Despite their indispensable contributions to the growth and prosperity of American agriculture, many immigrant workers have been treated as expendable, invisible components of the agricultural supply chain. Although President Trump's promises of improved working conditions were welcomed by some as a necessary first step, most labor representatives remained skeptical. They argued that these reforms lack the depth and permanence needed to create real change. Without substantive alterations to immigration policies and labor laws, such as clear pathways to legal residency, enforceable workplace protections, and anti-exploitation measures, simply reinstating work opportunities would only perpetuate a cycle of vulnerability and marginalization. Ultimately, what immigrant workers and their advocates seek is not merely the promise of better pay or benefits, but a fundamental shift in how immigrant labor is recognized and valued within the American economy. They call for the fair acknowledgement of immigrant workers' contributions, the establishment of transparent labor rights, and meaningful structural reforms that would guarantee long-term security, dignity, and equality under the law. Without addressing these deeper systemic issues, many believe that any short-term labor policy, no matter how well-intentioned, would fail to heal the long-standing wounds inflicted by years of neglect and mistreatment. Rebuilding trust requires more than financial incentives. It demands a sincere commitment to justice, fairness, and respect for those who have long sustained the nation's agricultural prosperity. Loss of trust in the Trump administration. Although President Donald Trump introduced measures such as granting temporary work permits to undocumented immigrant workers in an effort to address labor shortages in agriculture, not everyone viewed these actions as genuine solutions. A significant portion of the immigrant workforce has lived in a state of anxiety, believing that these measures were political traps designed to lure workers back into the system only to facilitate their later deportation. Rather than easing concerns, these policies have fueled deep skepticism within the immigrant community about the true intentions behind the administration's promises. It is difficult to deny that Trump's immigration policies over the years have pushed many immigrant workers to the margins of American society. Initiatives like building the border wall and imposing strict visa restrictions created a barrier between immigrant workers and legitimate opportunities in the United States. Despite the government's promises of temporary work authorization, many immigrants remain distrustful, fearing that such permits offer no long-term security and could instead be used for tighter surveillance and easier deportations. This persistent fear has discouraged many from returning to work, even in the face of labor shortages. The lack of transparency and clarity surrounding these measures has only amplified feelings of insecurity and eroded trust in the government. From the perspective of the workers, there is a strong belief that the U.S. government is merely exploiting the labor shortage in critical industries like agriculture as a means of exerting greater control over immigrant communities. The combination of strict immigration enforcement with temporary work permits appears, to many, less like a genuine solution and more like a strategy for social control. This perception has intensified concerns within the immigrant workforce, making them reluctant to return despite promises of better conditions. In my view, the Trump administration's approach revealed a deeper problem, failing to recognize immigrant workers as essential contributors, not just temporary economic tools. Once trust is broken, it is very hard to rebuild, especially when policies seem self-serving. Real reform requires a long-term commitment to fairness, transparency, and human dignity. Without addressing core issues, efforts to bring back immigrant workers will continue to face distrust. True progress starts with rebuilding trust, not with temporary fixes. Labor shortages and their impact on the economy. What initially began as a labor shortage in agriculture has now spread across multiple sectors of the U.S. economy. Industries heavily reliant on manual labor, including construction, hospitality, restaurants, and various service sectors, are now facing critical staffing shortages. Business owners in these fields are not only struggling to maintain regular operations, but are also grappling with rising costs as they are forced to increase wages to attract workers, which in turn drives up the prices of goods and services. This trend is particularly visible in states like Texas, California, and Florida, where the labor shortage has contributed to sharp increases in food prices. Fresh produce, processed foods, and everyday consumer services have all become more expensive due to the lack of skilled and experienced workers. Restaurants, hotels, and other commercial establishments are fighting to maintain service quality while simultaneously raising prices, which diminishes their competitiveness and restricts consumer spending, ultimately posing a threat to economic vitality. More critically, labor shortages are not only inflating business costs, but also directly impacting living standards, especially in regions where local economies depend heavily on agriculture and tourism. The rising cost of food and essential services places a growing financial burden on households, particularly affecting middle-class families and low-income workers. Furthermore, the shortage of labor risks causing major disruptions across the national supply chain. Manufacturers, retailers, and service industries could experience significant supply shortages, leading to reduced productivity and threatening the overall stability of the economy. If these labor gaps persist, the United States could face a serious economic downturn, weakening its competitiveness in global markets. This is no longer a problem isolated to a few industries. It has become a systemic issue. Persistent labor shortages undermine the foundation of the American economy, affecting crucial sectors like manufacturing, services, and commerce, while also straining the daily lives of ordinary citizens. Without timely and effective solutions, these shortages could continue to escalate, triggering widespread and unpredictable economic turbulence in the future. Impact on the livestock industry. The U.S. livestock industry is currently confronting an unprecedented labor crisis that threatens not only its immediate operations, but also its long-term sustainability and global competitiveness. Labor shortages have emerged as a critical vulnerability, severely disrupting daily activities on farms nationwide and exposing systemic weaknesses that could have profound implications for the entire agricultural sector. Livestock workers are vital to the day-to-day functioning of farms. Their responsibilities encompass feeding animals, maintaining clean living environments, monitoring herd health, administering medical care, and ensuring compliance with animal welfare standards. Skilled labor in this sector is essential not just for the well-being of the animals, but also for the production of high-quality, safe meat and dairy products that meet regulatory requirements and consumer expectations. However, as the availability of experienced workers continues to dwindle, farms are increasingly unable to provide animals with the necessary attention and timely interventions. This lack of care heightens the risk of disease outbreaks, stunts animal growth, and deteriorates overall herd health. The cascading effects include lower productivity, reduced quality of agricultural products, and significant financial losses for farmers and agribusinesses. In extreme cases, entire herds could be compromised, requiring costly interventions or culling, which would devastate already strained farm budgets. The labor crisis in the livestock sector also poses a serious threat to the broader food supply chain. With limited manpower, farmers struggle to sustain optimal production levels, leading to shortages in meat and dairy supplies across national markets. Distribution bottlenecks have become more frequent, exacerbating volatility in food availability and pricing. These disruptions not only erode the asset value of farms, but also contribute to a noticeable increase in food prices, compounding the financial pressures on American households already burdened by inflation and rising living costs. Furthermore, the labor shortage extends beyond domestic markets, impacting international trade. The U.S. economy, heavily reliant on the export of meat and animal products to maintain a favorable trade balance, faces significant challenges. Decreased production capacity limits the ability of food processing companies to meet international demand, risking the loss of long-standing trade partnerships and diminishing U.S. competitiveness in the global agricultural market. The negative ripple effects impact not just exporters, but also rural communities whose livelihoods depend on robust agricultural exports. If these labor shortages persist, the cumulative impact on the livestock industry could become catastrophic. Reduced herd sizes, lower export volumes, diminished farm incomes, and unstable food prices could destabilize both rural economies and the national agricultural sector. Long-term, the labor crisis threatens to weaken the United States' leadership position in global food production, making the industry more vulnerable to international competition and domestic economic shocks. Addressing this critical issue will require urgent and comprehensive solutions, including reforms to immigration policies to facilitate the entry of skilled agricultural workers, investment in workforce development programs, and the adoption of advanced technologies to supplement labor shortages. Without swift action, the livestock industry may face irreversible damage, with consequences extending far beyond the agricultural sector to the entire American economy. Crisis in the hospitality and construction industries. The labor shortage crisis is no longer confined to agriculture. It has rapidly expanded into other major sectors, particularly hospitality and construction. These industries, which form the backbone of urban economies and contribute significantly to national GDP, are now facing severe operational challenges due to staffing shortages. In the hospitality sector, the shortage of workers has severely compromised service quality and customer satisfaction. Essential positions such as front desk staff, housekeeping, food service, and maintenance crews remain critically understaffed. As a result, hotels, resorts, and restaurants are unable to meet customer expectations, leading to deteriorating service standards, negative reviews, and a loss of brand loyalty. Revenue streams are shrinking, and many businesses are operating below capacity, significantly affecting their profitability and long-term viability. Moreover, the decline in hospitality services reverberates throughout the tourism industry. As service quality declines, tourist satisfaction drops, reducing travel demand and further impacting local economies that heavily rely on tourism-related revenue. The construction industry is grappling with equally severe labor shortages. Large-scale infrastructure projects, residential developments, and commercial construction are experiencing delays, cost overruns, and in some cases, outright cancellations. With fewer workers available to perform critical construction tasks, project timelines have been extended indefinitely. Contractors face mounting challenges in meeting deadlines and staying within budget, while end consumers bear the brunt through skyrocketing prices for homes and construction services. Additionally, the slowdown in construction affects urban development goals, delaying essential infrastructure projects such as public transit systems, schools, hospitals, and affordable housing initiatives. These delays impact not just economic development, but also the quality of life for millions of Americans. Operating costs in the construction sector are soaring due to labor scarcity, forcing companies to raise wages to attract workers while simultaneously contending with rising material costs. This double burden reduces their competitiveness, particularly for small and medium-sized contractors, and exacerbates economic inequalities within the industry. Without swift and effective policy interventions, such as improved visa programs for skilled laborers, incentives for workforce training, and strategic investments, the ongoing crisis in the hospitality and construction sectors threatens to stall economic recovery, deepen market instability, and compromise America's long-term growth prospects. Immigration reform. Against the backdrop of critical labor shortages, the administration of President Donald Trump proposed a controversial immigration reform plan centered around a limited amnesty program. This proposal aimed to allow undocumented immigrant workers without criminal records to return and work legally within the United States, specifically targeting industries such as agriculture, construction, and hospitality where labor demand is most acute. Supporters of the plan argue that bringing back experienced workers would help fill crucial labor gaps, sustain industrial production, stabilize supply chains, and stimulate broader economic growth. They emphasize that many undocumented workers had historically contributed significantly to the American economy and that a pragmatic approach was necessary to address urgent labor needs without compromising national security. However, the proposal sparked fierce debate and opposition, particularly from groups advocating for strict immigration controls. Critics warn that granting amnesty could inadvertently incentivize future illegal immigration by sending a message that unauthorized entry into the U.S. may eventually be rewarded with legal status. They fear this could undermine border security efforts and place additional strains on social services. Opponents also highlight concerns about fairness. Legal immigrants who have adhered to the rigorous immigration process might perceive amnesty as an unjust advantage awarded to those who violated immigration laws. This perceived inequity risks deepening societal divisions, fostering resentment, and weakening public trust in the rule of law. Moreover, the political sensitivity of the amnesty debate has intensified polarization within American society. Immigration reform, long a contentious topic, has now become a flashpoint for broader ideological battles about national identity, economic strategy, and social cohesion. As such, the fate of the proposed amnesty program remains uncertain, with significant implications for both the labor market and the future of immigration policy in the United States. Rising cost of living. The labor shortage is not only affecting industries like agriculture and construction, but is also exacerbating the broader cost of living crisis in the United States. One of the most noticeable impacts has been the sharp increase in food prices, a critical factor directly affecting people's daily lives. Economists point out that the lack of agricultural workers has slowed down food production and distribution, making the entire process more expensive and leading to significant price hikes for agricultural goods. Families, especially those with low incomes, are bearing the brunt of rising food costs, further intensifying their financial burdens. The surge in food prices extends beyond fresh produce, affecting the costs of processed foods and everyday consumer goods. As production and transportation costs rise, retailers pass these increases on to consumers, forcing households to spend more on basic necessities. This situation is particularly challenging for middle-class families and low-wage workers, who were already struggling financially. Additionally, rising energy costs and other supply chain-related expenses are further driving up living costs in many regions. Experts warn that the impact is not limited to individual households, but could ripple across the broader economy. As living costs rise, consumer spending power weakens, leading to decreased consumption and investment, which in turn slows economic recovery following the pandemic. Small and medium-sized businesses, particularly in the retail and service sectors, are likely to face significant difficulties maintaining operations as consumer demand falls and operational costs surge. The rising cost of living not only pressures households, but could also pose serious risks to social stability. As families struggle to meet their basic needs due to skyrocketing prices, dissatisfaction and social tensions are likely to increase. Economists caution that if this situation is not addressed promptly through effective measures, such as supply chain reforms, lowering production costs, and strengthening the labor force, the U.S. economy could face long-term consequences. This would weaken consumer purchasing power and severely hinder the country's future economic recovery. The labor shortage is having wide-ranging effects, from farms to cities, from food prices to social stability. In my opinion, without comprehensive reforms to labor and immigration policies, the U.S. will face even greater challenges in the future. The question is, will we choose to adapt and change, or continue to let these cracks widen? What do you think? If you had a solution to the labor crisis, what would it be? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support us. See you in the next video.